Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Felicity Box, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to Sweep's A LinkedIn Live on CSRD post-Omnibus, what Wave 2 companies need to know. Since CSRD was announced, it seems to have raised more questions than it's answered for mid-sized companies. Who will fall under the threshold for reporting? How many metrics will need to be disclosed? How long do you have to get your data in order? Yesterday's EU Parliament vote has once again shifted the boundaries for companies needing to disclose in line with CSRD. Understandably, this period of uncertainty can be unsettling, but today we're going to shed some light on the changes and, more importantly, what we know will definitely be required of companies meeting the threshold for Wave 2. We'll be diving into the updated requirements and streamlined scope of the CSRD and exploring why starting your preparation now is not just a matter of compliance, but a strategic business decision. We'll also be looking at the role of AI and technology in streamlining your reporting processes. At Sweep, we've helped Wave 1 companies through their first CSRD reports on our platform, and today we'll share some of their learnings on the process. Ultimately, the businesses who have been successful in reporting to CSRD are able to build a competitive advantage and to unlock the measurable return on investment that comes with a strong sustainability strategy. To guide us through the latest updates, we are joined by two leading experts in the field. First, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by David Carlin, a globally recognized expert on ESG regulations and climate finance, advising governments, corporations, and financial institutions on climate and sustainability. David led the creation of UNEP FI's risk programming, working with over 100 global financial institutions on topics of climate stress tests, risk modeling, TCFD, and TNFD disclosure, among others. I'm also thrilled to be joined by Sweep's own Chief Impact Officer and former French Minister for Agriculture and Food, Julien de Normandie. Julien's policy expertise and close ties to EFRAG are invaluable as we navigate how best to support our customers through their CSRD disclosures. I'll be asking them some questions in just a minute, and we'll reserve time for a Q&A at the end. So if you have questions for either Julien or David, please do pop them in the chat as we go along. But Julien, I'd love to invite you to kick things off. Could you please fill us in on what happened with yesterday's vote?
Thank you very much, Felicity. Hi, everyone. Yes, I will be very pleased to share with you a very quick update regarding the situation. As you said, Felicity, yesterday it was a very important meeting at the EU level. It was the meeting of what we call the jury committee. What does it? The jury committee is a kind of legal committee before the parliament vote. And this jury committee has decided to make some changes.
Oh, I think we've just lost Julien, just as he was about to tell us what those changes are.
Is it okay?
Yeah, you're back now. Carry on.
Okay, so sorry. So you've got some changes regarding the delay to implementation, especially for Wave 2. Wave 2 companies, they're going to have to report under CSRD in 2028 based on 2027 fiscal year figures. You've got modification as well in terms of the scope of the companies which have to report under CSRD.
Oh, we've lost you again, Julien. We'll just give him 1 second to see if he can come back and join us.
I'm so sorry. Can you hear me?
You're back, yes.
Yeah,
Carry on with the scope.
The Wi-Fi in the building doesn't work very well. I'm so sorry for that. So I was mentioning the scope of the implementation of the regulation. So as of today, the last news is that if you are companies with more than 1,000 employees plus a turnover which is up to 450 million euros, then you're going to have to report under CSRD. If you are below one of those two criteria, you will not have to report under CSRD. And so this scope is a very important one. You have to keep in mind this threshold at 1,000 employees and the second threshold at 415 million in terms of turnover. In addition to that, we're going to have some changes regarding the number of indicators you're going to have to populate. As of today, before Omnibus, it was about 1,150 indicators to be populated, depending on the materiality of the indicators. Now, it will be between 350 to 450 indicators to be populated. It will not depend on the vote of the parliament. It will depend on the works, the current works done by EFRAG with the EU Commission and after that EU Parliament. So you will have some very significant changes in terms of implementation, in terms of scope, in terms of indicators. But in parallel, some very important topics will not change at all. Auditability first. Auditability will remain. It means that if you will have to report under CSRD, you will have to report with auditable data. Second point, double materiality. Double materiality will remain, impact and financial materiality. And what's about extraterritoriality? Extraterritoriality is a very, very important point. Today, I can tell you that the EU Parliament plus the EU Council, they want to keep the extraterritoriality of the CSRD regulation, which is very important for all the foreign companies attending this webinar. But probably the threshold will be changed in the future. I will keep you posted about that. Having said that, what is very important is to see the next step, if I may, Felicity.
Of course, yeah, that'd be brilliant. Thank you.
And so in the next slide, what you can see is the different next step. I'm so sorry because the slide is pretty complex. It's not my fault. It's just because the EU Parliament and EU Commission, they will have to navigate step by step. So on the first line, you can see what will happen on the Parliament at the Parliament level. Yesterday, October 13th, it was the vote at the Legal Affairs Committee, the one I did mention. Next week, it will be the vote at the Parliament level. And after this vote, you're going to have what we call the trilogue. What's the trilogue? The trilogue is this room of discussion between the Parliament, between the Council, and between the EU Commission. And only after the trilogue, you're gonna have the final threshold. You know, the famous 1,000 employees and 450 million euros in terms of turnover. It's only after the trilogue that we're gonna have the final threshold. But most likely, and very most likely, this 1,000 employees and 450 million in terms of turnover will be the final one, most likely. In parallel, you will have the discussion at the EU Commission level regarding the number of indicators. Last month, the EFRAG did finalize what we call the consultation about the indicators. In 2 months, by end of November, EFRAG will send to the EU Commission the final proposal regarding the number of indicators. You know, between 350 to 450 indicators, as I did mention earlier. And by early mid-2026, we're going to have the final ESRS, meaning the final number of indicators. Once again, most likely it will be around 400 indicators to be populated compared to the more than 1,000 indicators you will have to populate today. And in 2027, it will be the whole regulation which will enter into force. But what does it mean for companies? The companies attending this webinar. The last slide I wanted to present you, this one. So it's a very complex one. Don't be afraid. You can see and you can get all the information on our website, sweep.net. But what is very important to keep in mind, if you are a Wave 1 companies already, you have to report under CSRD in 2025 based on fiscal year 2024. In 2026, you will have to do exactly the same exercise, no change. In 2027, you will have to report under the new ESRS, meaning the new indicators, less indicators than previously. If you are a wave 2 companies, meaning more than 1,000 employees and more than 450 million of turnover in euro, then you're going to have to report in 2028 based on fiscal year 2027. So all this information you can find out everyone on our website. I'm so sorry, I was too long for sure, but it's not so easy to make a resume of all this information regarding this very exhaustive regulation.
Thank you so much, Julien. I think it's a real treat to have an expert breaking down the policy updates for us like that. So thank you for the update on those timelines. And hopefully the proposed changes, when they've been approved by the EU Commission, there's going to be lots more clarity for all Wave 2 businesses. But in the meantime, David, it's really easy to get focused on specific thresholds and timelines, especially when they're up in the air. But for businesses listening, regardless of whether they fall directly into Wave 2 or not, what do these requirements really mean in practice?
Yeah, so I think that's really, to me, the next step from what Julien so nicely pointed out about these changes, which is this is not a wait around till 2027 or, hey, we don't have to worry about this. This is essentially giving you the roadmap for that future. And what does that look like? Well, it really looks like the processes internally need to be built up. And I think about that in terms of three different areas. One is, of course, on the data collection, that's critical. The next is on systems. So across the organization, how are you bringing this information together in coherent ways? Which teams are feeding in? Who owns what? And then finally, the skills side, the knowledge and the abilities, both at the executive level to understand what needs to be prioritized, all the way down to relationships and others. And so this is where we can start to make a plan that then ultimately will be disclosed. I think this is the way to have the best opportunity to really build capacity and to really build internal capabilities rather than relying on someone to just do a report at the end. There's a chance here to get this right, to have better eyes on emerging risks, to have better understanding of vulnerabilities across supply chains, to have better information ready for you as you think about what the opportunities are that are going to come in a changing world. These are the kinds of things that I think are really critical and what kind of comes through here. Another part, what I would say is the process of laying out how you're going to get there is itself valuable. So this is the time to be thinking about that. This is the time to be considering what those periods of readiness are, where some of those gaps are. So understanding, hey, if we did have to do this tomorrow, I don't think we are ready. What are the steps that get us to that readiness? Because that to me is the big process. And it also makes the best use of your resources because over time, these aren't just thrown into a report, but actually integrated into the decisions that you make.
Absolutely. Thank you. I think Wave 2 companies have been given this gift of time, and I think you've given some really good examples there of how to make the most of that. Can you talk a little bit about more why it's sort of in companies' interest to make the most of that time that they've been given?
Yeah, I think the first reason is very much well, multiple reasons are self-interested driven, but the first one is it's better to lay out the plan now. It's better to build the internal capabilities, the systems, the skills, the knowledge now to get that versus having to wait till the last minute and rush through, where often you're going to be dependent purely on an external support and you're not going to get as much value out of that. Whereas if you're engaging in more of a partnership, bringing in the right tools, bringing in the right knowledge now, you're going to be able to really reap the benefits from the information that's gained, the application of it. And so it is something that really you own and is in your processes. I would say another thing to mention is when it comes to capital, there's still a large, and I would say looking at inflows over the last months, growing pool of investors as well as sources of capital that are looking at sustainability, are interested, and they need to see what firms are doing. And in many ways, reporting is simply just the price of admission. If you don't have that information, it's going to be hard to access certain forms of capital. And I think that means being able to see this as a way to showcase your story, as a way to provide the prerequisites to getting financing. I think those are really important. But I also think even more so the processes that you go about doing, these are the ones that will help you spot the risks, will make sure your systems are talking to each other, will make sure you're not making a mistake or missing something that's really important here. And I think that to me is one of the biggest takeaways, which is what we're really trying to do is develop the right practices. Then the reporting piece is sort of the after effect of that. That's just, hey, how do we report on the right things? How do we talk about this stuff? And it should reflect what you're doing rather than the other way around, it reflecting not what you're doing, but just what you've thrown onto a page. And so we have that time now to get that right, to do that right. And the world is changing enough that those signs are everywhere, from flooding to energy market shifts, that these things make sense to do. So write them down and think about how they fit. And then the reporting piece becomes a lot more understandable. So it is something that adds value. It leaves you better prepared. And I think the time to start thinking about that is now. We're getting that clarity that we didn't have over the last few months, knowing who's in scope, knowing when things are in scope, knowing what the challenges are. I think all of that is in front of us, and we're going to really see the firms that really engage with it benefiting the most.
100%, thank you. And I think this ties back nicely as well to Julian's point at the beginning that double materiality isn't going anywhere. Your impacts, risks, and opportunities of all of the different environmental, social, and governance metrics that you are reporting on are all kind of relevant to that business resilience and that sustainability risk management, as well as the final kind of reporting requirements. I think that ties us really nicely, David, as well, onto Julian. At Sweep, we've been supporting Wave 1 companies who have already been through this end-to-end CSRD disclosure process. We're lucky enough to have supported many customers with their first CSRD report. Are there any lessons that we can learn from this, and what can we pass on to those in Wave 2?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely, when you are reporting under CSRD, you can do it only because you want to apply with the regulation, to comply with the regulation. But you can try to make this regulation useful for you. And this is a big challenge. And as you said, Felicity, and as you said, David, behind CSRD, you've got this IRO, Impact Risk Opportunity Assessment. Probably this is the most important point included into within the EU regulation. This impact risk opportunity is so valuable for the companies. It's so important. When you are running a company, you need to see and to assess all your impact. You need to see and to assess all your risk all among your value chain. And you need to see and to assess which kind of opportunity you could have due to the fact that you're going to have this sustainable transformation inside your companies. And as of today at Sweep, we're going to have more than 100 of our customers using our CSRD module. More than 100. Part of them, for sure, are part of the Wave 1, meaning that they currently have to report under CSRD. But some of them are not part of the Wave 1, only part of the Wave 2. But they have decided to anticipate. Why? First, because this is a matter of quality of the data. They want to be sure that the day they will have to report under CSRD, they will have a high level of quality of the data. Just because thanks to this high level of quality, you can be sure that you're going to have some auditable data and data you can trust in. Second point, just because they think they can create some added value thanks to that, thanks to the CSRD, precisely because of this IRO approach, impact risk opportunity approach. And we've got so many examples about that. Just two examples. The first one is Auchan. You know, this big famous retail company. Auchan, already they are currently reporting under CSRD. And thanks to the CSRD approach, they told us that in terms of governance, you have so many additional people involved inside the company to tackle the different sustainable issue compared to previously, that the added value was absolutely tremendous. Another example is Quanto, not a retail, much more a tech companies. And for exactly the same reason, for them, it was so important to consider all the risks and opportunities due to the regulation. And I can multiply this kind of example today. The last point, very important, is today, when you are speaking about CSRD, always or most of the time, we are speaking about the complexity of the regulation, etc., etc. At Sweep, we are fully confident that we can make this regulation valuable for the company, valuable for the sustainable company. And it's not Felicity or I advocating for that. This is our current clients advocating for that.
Thank you, Julien. And I think, there's been a nice kind of synergy there between David kind of laying out that sort of in principle, what should companies be doing, and some nice examples of companies who are following those principles very, very tightly already and kind of paving the way for other Wave 2 companies to do the same with Sweep. David, we've talked a little bit about sort of what companies should be doing and kind of how they can get ahead by putting into place these plans and sort of understanding where their gaps are. Do you have any comment on sort of the tools and technology that they can put in place to help them do this and to kind of undergo that process? We've spoken a little bit about Sweep, but outside of that, what can they be really doing to leverage technology in this space?
Yeah, I think that there's really a lot that that can be done, and sometimes technology we think of is, oh, it's all AI and it's all high tech, cutting edge. Some of it is, and I think AI has a lot of promise in terms of filling in proxy data, in terms of drawing inferences. Many climate risk modeling tools are using some sort of forms of machine learning or AI neural networks to look at risks and how they emerge. But to be totally fair, that I think is just part of the equation. I think the whole suite of tools probably is a good deal broader. And the first, of course, is having effective data management systems, having effective ability to get information across teams. When any institution that's big enough has multiple departments, multiple teams, definitions are really important. So having the right tagging, the right keys there, recognizing if you're working with hundreds of suppliers, how do you standardize? So, clarity of use in terms of questionnaires, but also standardized measures when you're talking about risk, when we're talking about impacts. Are we saying the same thing across the organization? So those things can be, fairly qualitative, but they can also be highly quantitative. But the main point is having approaches that build consistency. I think another part on the process side, and I think this gets ignored a lot, is around governance and around escalation. What are you going to do about the risk? I think that's one of the big questions that people need to understand, don't ask enough of. And then I think the last part, is partially tools, but it's also very much skills. What kind of skills are needed? Well, for some, that may be climate scenario analysis. I know we do quite a lot of work helping firms understand that. Some of it may be around transition planning, understanding where the ball is going when it comes to decarbonization. Some of it may be around nature and nature impacts. Others might be on the social side, but having a facility and a knowledge of those topics. And more importantly than that, I think a lot of people stop there. It's what do they do for your role? What is the intersection between your role or your team and those topics? That's really the critical piece where it all comes together. So making sure that those skills are there and making sure then the policies, practices, and other tooling is in place to enable you to act effectively on it. I think those are really the key pieces. This is that time to uptool and upskill for organizations.
And if I may, Felicity, just a second, David, what is very important to consider is that AI can be very useful. At Sweep, we are using AI everywhere into the platform. So Sweep as a ESG data management platform, you can collect all the data, you can manage all the data, and at the end of the day, just because the CSRD has been totally coded into the platform, you can populate directly all the different indicators of the CSRD. And then you can generate your CSRD report. This is Sweep. And at every level, in Sweep, in the platform, we did some AI application. So it makes all your journey easier, not very easy, but less complex than before. This is due to AI. And I think we can be very proud about all the AI components that we did implement into the platform. But let's be realistic. Thanks to AI, you will never get, the magic button. You put all the file into the platform, and thanks to the magic button, you just have the final CSRD report and nothing to do. It will not happen. Sometimes you've got some people promising you with this magic button. It doesn't make sense. First, because it doesn't exist. And second, because for sure, if you want to enter this CSRD journey, it's also because you consider that it could be useful for your company to have a sustainable journey. Not only because you have to report under CSRD and you have to comply with the regulation. This is not the only purpose. The main purpose is how to make your company more sustainable on the long term, and then to create value, to address all the physical risk, to be sure about the sustainability of your supply chain, to avoid any risk regarding what could happen due to the impact of the climate change or other environmental impact on your own core business, and then to seize the opportunity, just because compared to your competitors, you will have this complete sustainable journey. And so this is exactly what we are trying to do at Sweep, enabling the companies to do so. But let's be realistic, as David said, AI will never provide you with a magic button and then nothing to do. It will not happen. And fortunately, it will not happen.
And I think that's, why it's so important, as David was saying, that we need to invest in technology, of course, but also in the skills and the people around you who are building up these reports, who are deciding kind of based on what you see from the insights, what the action needs to be and tailoring those back to the company. And the two really go hand in hand. With AI, we can actually absolutely go further and faster, but without knowing those skills, kind of without having that knowledge and embedded expertise within organizations, you won't retain the control over that data that David was mentioning earlier as well. Just a reminder to everybody, please do put your questions in the chat. I just have one more question each for Julien and David, and then we'll move to audience questions. Julien, a final one for you. So one of the criticisms of CSRD since the very beginning has it seemed overly complex to businesses who need to report. Having seen this from both the policymaker side and the business perspective, what's your take on the complexity of CSRD?
I'm not sure that the complexity terms is the proper one. For sure, when you have a look at the EU regulation, it's more than 200 pages with so many new concepts, ESRS, double materiality, taxonomy, IRO, transition plan, and so on. So you can consider all this regulation as very complex. But you can consider as well this regulation as very exhaustive, not complex, exhaustive, meaning that the regulation wants to address all the different levels, all the different impact, all the different indicators related to sustainability. And here you have the main difference between complexity and something absolutely exhaustive. I think if we want to accelerate, we need something exhaustive. But in parallel, you can be supported by different actors. Sweep is one of them. Thanks to the platform, thanks to all the digital approach, then you can go faster and you can make all this regulation easier to be to report under it. So my point is, let's say it's not so complex, it's very exhaustive. And taking into account the fact that it's very exhaustive, how I can use some tools helping me to populate and to report under this exhaustive regulation. This is absolutely different. And once again, behind all this debate between exhaustive or complex or whatever, I think the most important point is to keep in mind that this regulation has to be useful. a regulation which is not useful, it doesn't make sense, for sure. It cannot be sustainable. So my concern is how, thanks to SWIP or other actors, but thanks to SWIP, we can make this regulation useful. This is my most important message and point.
Thank you so much. I think, as with so many things, it's a question of mental reframing, right? Of going, it's not complex, it's actually comprehensive. And these policymakers have put all of the effort into going, what are all of the different things that you need to think about to be prepared for this sustainability risk? How do you work with that and seeing it as an opportunity rather than another task on our long to-do lists? David, I have one final question for you as well. I kind of want to look beyond the immediate horizon. We've talked a lot about kind of what's happening in the next few years with companies having to report and be compliant. It's very easy for businesses to get caught up in that kind of reactionary regulatory headlines. For companies here today, particularly those that are growing rapidly, what's your closing advice on how to build a truly resilient sustainability strategy?
Yeah, I think that really begins now, and it begins with a really thoughtful approach to what the impacts, risks, and opportunities are that you face. And if that sounds very similar to what Julian mentioned in the requirements, that's not an accident. It's that a lot of the things that we are thinking about when it comes to reporting are also just core to how we operate our business. And that is the goal, of course, to narrow that distance between action and reporting. The goal should be that the reporting is reflective of what you're doing, and getting good value, good use out of the work you're doing really comes from that fact, from these are pieces of information that we need. These are pieces of information that are going to help us better price, better manage supply chains, avoid potential risks, avoid the concerns from this or that supplier. Think about what the new ways are that markets are changing, and say, how are we potentially going to be hit by this, whether it's on a carbon price, or benefited by this, whether it's through policies that contribute to green progress. And so I think, to me, that the way to get started is to stop sort of creating the artificial distinction between sustainability strategy and strategy, resiliency strategy and strategy. A plan like a business continuity plan, if people don't know how to use it, if people haven't looked at it, it's not going to be that useful when the emergency comes. If it's woven in, if it's integrated in, that's where it's going to make a difference. So in some ways, over time, what I think is the most valuable thing, the thing people will get the most bang for their buck, the most resource and return from, is really thinking about what are the ways in which those impacts, risks, and opportunities have effect for them. And again, if that sounds like the beginning of the double materiality assessment, I think it should be. I think firms should be asking these questions. You have a risk register before you do reporting. You have a risk register even when it isn't always shared externally. Start thinking about those kind of questions. And on the opportunity side, to me, that's where the strategy comes. But it's narrowing that gap and removing the distinction between that sustainability strategy and other strategy.
Brilliant, thank you. Some really useful advice there, and thank you so much for sharing your insights across my questions. We've got some audience questions that have come in whilst we've been talking, and I'm just going to put these to both of you. So the first question that's come in is around, okay, we've been talking lots about companies individually and kind of what the benefits are to those individual companies from reporting. But the question that's come in is, what's the power of all companies reporting to CSRD, to disclosing these metrics collectively? What do we gain as sort of a society, a market, or a continent with this data across all companies? I don't know, either of you have a comment on the kind of collective power of CSRD?
Maybe one first comment, and I will let David to complete. But what is very important, not to have an individual approach, but a collective approach, is that at the end of the day, you can have access to a kind of benchmark. And this benchmark is so useful because this is one of a kind of indicators for your own business. So you can see what your competitors are doing at the time being, and then you can position yourself compared to your competitors. But most important, and we didn't speak about them from the beginning of this webinar, but these actors are so important. I think about the financial institution, banking system, private equity, asset manager, and blah, blah, blah. And those guys, when they're gonna invest into your business, either you are listed or non-listed companies, but when those guys, they're gonna invest into your companies, for sure, now they will consider the benchmark about what, let's say, market practice, what are the average sector by sector regarding all the sustainable issue, and then they will put these figures into their own assessment system to consider or not giving you the financing. So definitely, this collective approach is very useful for you as somebody who runs a company, but could be very useful for the financial institution. And so in consequence of that, you have to consider it, because if you want to get the more profitable investment or the more profitable loan, then it will be better for you to be well ranked regarding the benchmark compared to very badly ranked inside this benchmark. This is one example.
Just putting that data within context. And I think, David, this was what you were mentioning earlier about accessing that capital and it being important to kind of disclose these metrics because it's what investors or financial institutions are looking for. I don't know if you have a further comment to Julien there about the kind of collective power of seeing all of this data come together.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this data will really help organizations to make better decisions. I think it will also play a really critical role, as Julien said, in access to capital and the ability to not only access that capital, but also in many cases, get preferential rates depending on, how the fund is structured and classed. So doing the right things. But I think more and more what we're going to see is this information is going to be kind of just the cost of admission. It's similar to, would you expect to be able to raise capital without financial statements? Probably not. Similarly here, I think these will be, too big, too material over time to ignore. And I think that to me is a really good reason to be understanding what the impact of this is on the market. It's not just capital being allocated more efficiently. It's, well, if you don't have this information for us, it's going to be very hard to compare you to file. And you can see this in other markets that are opaque. There's always a discount for that opacity. And so clarity here actually in many cases can improve and increase the overall value.
Brilliant. Thank you both. We've had another question come in around so voluntary reporting. Somebody online has said that they try and make sure that all of it's important for all company topics to be covered, even if it's not actually required under the ESRSs. An example that they've given here is data security. Julien, I don't know if you have some examples perhaps from our other Wave 1 companies where they're reporting on topics even beyond the ESRS requirements.
Yeah, definitely. We've got so many examples about companies reporting under CSRD, but companies, they want to not only monitor the, let's say, CSRD data points, but to monitor some extra data points. Just one very common example, I am a company, I have already implemented a sustainable strategy. Within this sustainable strategy, I've got a bunch of KPIs. Some of them are covered by CSRD, but other ones are not covered by CSRD. And then I will follow not only the CSRD data point, but the CSRD data point plus all my own data points already fixed because of my own sustainable strategy. So we've got many examples of that. And the point is, at the end of the day, at Sweep, what we are trying to do is to be sure that at the end, you're going to have a kind of cockpit, a kind of dashboard to monitor all the KPIs, not only the CSRD one, but also your own KPIs, to be sure that every KPIs could be useful for you. And then you could take the best decision for your own company regarding all the different KPIs you will have on your dashboard. So yes, Olga, answer is yes, definitely yes.
And David, presumably that goes the same for you as well, in terms of kind of making sure there will always be some industry-specific metrics that are subsector or market-specific metrics that are not covered under CSRD. What's the importance of companies doing their own homework there to find out the topics, such as data security, which might be material for them and their investors?
Yeah, I think that really, again, this is about access not only to capital, but also, to alignment with stakeholders. And so there's going to constantly be expectations that organizations will have certain data that they, that others will be requesting. I think you're going to see that, but I think even more so than that, there always are industry metrics. Remember, this is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. It isn't every single thing. And that means that there's other financial considerations included and related. And so I think if you're looking at this from strategic steering internally, or you're looking at this as an investor externally, you're really thinking about, how do I put these pieces together? There's more information than ever. Now, how do we take those things and use them effectively? How do we take that and put a synthesis between our financial information, our sustainability information, and where we're heading? And I think that becomes both the challenge, but also we have more information now than ever before to do it.
Definitely, thank you. About standardizing that baseline kind of foundation, so we can all talk across markets, compare across industries, but having that extra kind of cherry on top, which is being the individual approach for each organization. Another question that's come in is around assurance and auditability. Julianne, you mentioned at the start that this is absolutely going to be something that remains really important to ESRS disclosure. So the question has come in asking, how do we balance maintaining the EU's rigorous assurance requirements while still using AI and technology to streamline the process?
It's a very, very important point. At the end of the day, you will have to keep all the auditability of your data. This is a requirement. It's what we call the limited insurance. So it's a no-brainer. You will have to get some auditable data. And not only to get the auditable data, you will have to be audited by an auditor. And for sure, an auditor, he's looking for auditable data. And if the auditor, he doesn't have the auditable data, then he will ask you for getting this auditable data. So it's a no-brainer. We need auditable data. And here you have this very relevant question, how to use AI, but to keep the auditability of all your data. This is a big issue. At Sweep, for instance, when you are using AI, just one use case, when you have a survey to be populated with the qualitative indicators requested by CSRD, then thanks to AI, you can upload some documents, and then thanks to AI, you're gonna have a first proposal of your answer, meaning that directly the AI will populate your qualitative indicators. It's absolutely tremendous, and in terms of time to value, it's absolutely valuable. But when we are using AI to do so, we are sure that at the end of the day, all the different information could be auditable, just because we know exactly the source, we know exactly where does it come from, we know exactly who is the one who has populated or reviewed the answer, who is the one who has changed after that the answer, etc., etc. So remember what I told about the magic button? It doesn't exist, precisely because everything has to be auditable at the end of the day.
Thank you so much, Julianne. I think we are at time today. So it just remains for me to say thank you so much to David and Julianne for their insights. Thank you to all of you for tuning into today's LinkedIn Live and for all of your questions. Any questions that we didn't get to in the Q&A today, we will follow up with you directly after the LinkedIn Live. So don't worry, answers are still coming. And of course, if you do want to learn more about Sweep and how we help businesses with their sustainability data management and CSRD reporting, there's going to be a QR code shown on the screen shortly, and you can always find us at our website, sweep.net. Thank you so much, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, and I hope everyone is staying up to speed with all the changes that we're talking through today.